Are you having difficulty learning parasympathetic ganglions? Then don't worry, I'll teach you that. Before that, I'm Hariharan, a third year medical student, and I'm going to teach you high yielding topics related to anatomy, physiology, biochemistry in my channel. So if you're interested in more such videos, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel Naralu. Okay guys, now we are going to see parasympathetic ganglions. But before that, you want to know the definition of ganglion to learn parasympathetic ganglions. Let's see what is the definition of a ganglion. A ganglion is a structure containing a number of nerve cell bodies, typically linked by synapses and often forming a swelling on a nerve fiber. But why is this ganglion called a parasympathetic ganglion? Let me tell you about that. These parasympathetic ganglions generally has three roots, that is parasympathetic root, sympathetic root and sensory root. But only the parasympathetic relays information. That is the reason why it's called a parasympathetic ganglion. Others will just pass through them. They won't relay any information. The main parasympathetic ganglions we are going to study are nasociliary ganglion, pterygopalatine ganglion, submandibular ganglion and otic ganglion. But in this video we are going to study only nasociliary ganglion and pterygopalatine ganglion. Before that, let's learn some general characteristics of ganglion. All ganglions are topographically related to branches of trigeminal nerve. That's the fifth cranial nerve. The trigeminal nerve arises from the pons here and then it divides into three branches. The ophthalmic branch, the maxillary branch, the mandibular branch. The ophthalmic branch passes through the superior orbital fissure. The maxillary branch passes through the foramen rotundum and the mandibular branch passes through the foramen ovale. They are named as phi 1, phi 2 and phi 3 here. But functionally they are related to other cranial nerves. You guys might ask me, what is a topographic nerve and a functional nerve? Let me tell you. A topographic nerve is the nerve through which the ganglion is attached. Like this way. Physically it is attached to a particular nerve, that is a topographic nerve. And then the functional nerve is the nerve which supplies a branch, that is the parasympathetic branch to this ganglion which relays information. That's why functionally it will be more associated with the other nerve instead of the nerve it is attached to topographically. That is why this is called a functional nerve. Okay, that's all is required for the general information about parasympathetic ganglions. Let's go into the nasociliary ganglion. Nasociliary ganglion is 2 mm in diameter. Its location is it lies near the apex of orbit between the optic nerve and lateral rectus. Let me show you the picture of it. See, this is the diagram of the orbit. And here is the eyeball. This is the optic nerve. And here this way you see a muscle. This is the lateral rectus. So between the optic nerve and the lateral rectus lies a tiny body. You see here. This is the nasociliary ganglion. Okay. Now let's go into the roots of nasociliary ganglion. It receives a parasympathetic root, also called as a motor root. It is derived from the nerve to inferior oblique. It relays in the ganglion, as obvious already I have mentioned, and supplies the ciliary muscle and sphincter pubillae via short ciliary nerves. And then comes the sympathetic root. It is derived from sympathetic plexus around the internal carotid artery. It supplies the dilator pupillae and the blood vessels of the eyeball, but it does not relay. And finally comes the sensory root. It is derived from nasociliary nerve, sensory fibers for pain, touch and temperature. And there is no relay in the ganglion from these fibers either. Now let's understand it better through this diagram. You see, this is the brainstem and this is the pons region. There the trigeminal nerve is arising and it has three branches. That is the ophthalmic branch, the maxillary branch, the mandibular branch. You see this orange line here? This is the fibers arising from the trigeminal nerve. It goes to this ophthalmic branch and from there it divides and forms the nasociliary nerve. To this nasociliary nerve only, this ganglion, that is a nasociliary ganglion, is attached to. So that's the reason why the nasociliary nerve, which is a branch of the trigeminal nerve, is called the topographic nerve. You might ask me, where is this parasympathetic link coming from? Okay, see, this is the pons. So above it, it will be the midbrain. In the midbrain, there is the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. From the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, these parasympathetic fibers, the ones in the red you see, it is traveling through the CN3, that is the oculomotor nerve. From there, it is reaching the nerve to inferior oblique and from there, it goes and relays in the ganglion, that is the nasociliary ganglion. This is the parasympathetic root of the nasociliary ganglion. Now we have seen the parasympathetic root. Let's go for the sympathetic root. It arises from the plexus around the internal carotid artery and goes straightly to the nasociliary ganglion. The plexus around this internal carotid artery is coming from the superior cervical sympathetic ganglion, which in turn receives fibers from the T1 part of the sympathetic plexus. So now you see there is this nasociliary ganglion. It receives the parasympathetic root and it relays here. The sensory root, it just passes through it, and then the sympathetic root, which also just passes through it. All these three roots together form the short ciliary nerves, which in turn supplies the dilator pupillae muscle, the constrictor pupillae muscle, as well as the ciliary muscle. Now you might ask me, what is the clinical importance of studying this ganglion? The main thing is it supplies the muscles associated with accommodation. It is also involved in the light-based reflexes. Okay guys, that's all is there to study in the nasociliary ganglion. Let's go to our next ganglion, that is the pterygopalatine ganglion. Pterygopalatine ganglion. It is 4 to 5 mm in diameter and also known as ganglion of hay fever. Location. It is located in the upper part of pterygopalatine fossa. You see, pterygopalatine fossa is a small pyramidal face just inferior to the apex of orbit. It is continuous with the infratemporal fossa laterally through the pterygomaxillary fissure. This is the pterygopalatine fossa. In the pterygopalatine fossa, here is the maxillary nerve. From this maxillary nerve, the pterygopalatine ganglion is suspended. This is the location of the pterygopalatine ganglion. Let's also see the important relations associated with pterygopalatine ganglion. You see, behind of it, this number 5, is the pterygoid canal. Above it is this maxillary nerve. Then medial to it is the sphenopalatine foramen, and then in front of it is the inferior orbital fissure. Okay, this is the relations which I mentioned before. And now let's go to the roots. Roots. Topographically, it is related to the maxillary nerve, which is a branch of trigeminal nerve. And then functionally, it's related to the facial nerve, which is the 7th cranial nerve. Now let's come to the parasympathetic root. It is derived from the nerve of pterygoid canal with preganglionic parasympathetic fibers arising from superior salivatory nucleus. Postganglionic fibers supply secretomotor fibers to lacrimal gland, glands of nose, palate, nasopharynx and paranasal sinuses. It relays in the ganglion. And next, the sympathetic root. It is derived from sympathetic plexus around the internal carotid artery. You see, again there is internal carotid artery. It's the same as the nasociliary ganglion. Via the nerve of pterygoid canal. There is no relay in the ganglion from these sympathetic fibers. And next, the sensory root. It is derived from the maxillary nerve, and of course there is no relay for this also. Now for better understanding, let's take a look at the diagram. This is a pterygopalatine ganglion and it is suspended by the maxillary nerve. It receives parasympathetic fibers from the superior salivatory nucleus here. The fibers travels via the facial nerve and then through the greater superficial petrosal nerve. From there, it joins with the sympathetic nerve which is arising from the plexus around the internal carotid artery to form the Vidian's nerve, and together they reach the ganglion. The sympathetic nerve will travel directly by just passing through the ganglion, but this parasympathetic part will be relaying in the ganglion. Later, the postganglionic fibers will come out as 4 branches. That is the orbital branches, the nasal branches, the palatal branches and the pharyngeal branches. The orbital branches come out through the inferior orbital fissure and they supply mainly the lacrimal gland. The nasal part come out and they divide into medial and lateral parts. The medial part supplies the nasal septum, the lateral part supplies the lateral wall of nose. And then the palatal parts, they come out and divide into 2 parts, that is lesser palatine nerve and greater palatine nerve, and they pass through the respective foramen and they supply the palate. The pharyngeal part goes out and supplies the pharynx. Now let's go to the clinical importance of this ganglion. In conditions such as allergy or allergic rhinitis, there will be irritation of the nerve ganglion, which can cause congestion of glands of nose, palate and lacrimal gland, leading to runny nose and eyes. So yeah, that's it for today's video. For the next 2 ganglions, watch the part 2 of parasympathetic ganglions, will come out soon. If you want my handwritten notes, then join the Telegram channel link which I'll be providing in the description for the notes.